Are you out of your mind? Do you even understand what you've done?
Stop! Silence in the court.
The sound didn't echo. It detonated. Skin met skin with a violence so sharp it felt like the air itself had been struck. For a fraction of a second, the world inside courtroom 304 ceased to exist. No breathing, no blinking, no movement. Just the aftershock of a billionaire's hand still suspended in the air, fingers curled like they'd forgotten how to unclench. A pen slipped from the court reporter's hand and clattered to the floor. Someone in the gallery gasped, then covered their mouth too late. At the center of it all stood Julian Thorne. $6 billion couldn't buy him composure in that moment. His chest rose and fell erratically, nostrils flaring, eyes dark and wild. No longer the polished visionary gracing magazine covers, but something raw, feral, and deeply dangerous. His tailored suit strained across his shoulders as if it too wanted to escape what he had just revealed. Across from him, staggering back into the defense table, was Alicia Thorne. Her hand flew to her cheek, more in disbelief than pain. The shock registered first, the humiliation, the exposure, the certainty that this moment would live forever. Cameras were rolling, strangers were watching, and the man who once whispered love into her ear had just erased every pretense of restraint. But the true terror didn't come from Julian. It came from the bench. Judge Margaret Vance did not reach for her gavel. She didn't shout. She didn't bang wood against wood. She slowly removed her glasses instead, as if her vision itself had betrayed her. Her fingers trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. She stood. The room seemed to lean toward her, pulled by the gravity of what was coming. "You just struck my daughter." The words landed heavier than the slap. No one moved. No one breathed. Julian laughed once, sharp and incredulous, like a man certain he'd misheard reality. "That's not possible," he said. "She doesn't have a family." Judge Vance's voice cracked. Not loudly, but completely. "She does now." But to understand how the most powerful man in renewable energy ended up handcuffed in a courtroom, exposed by the very woman he tried to erase, you have to go back. Back to the lie everyone believed. To the illusion of perfection. To the woman the world thought had everything. Julian Thorne was a brand, not just a man. The press called him a visionary. Governments called him indispensable. Investors called him untouchable. He'd built Thorne Dynamics from a scrappy startup into the backbone of Europe's renewable energy grid. His smile sold progress. His speeches promised a cleaner future. His name moved markets. And beside him, always a step behind, always perfectly framed, was his wife. Alicia Thorne, elegant, quiet, impossibly graceful. A former art curator with a soft smile and a talent for disappearing, just enough to make Julian shine brighter. The tabloids adored her. Fashion editors studied her. Critics called her timeless. What they didn't see were the bruises hidden beneath silk sleeves. They didn't hear the way Julian's voice changed once the car doors closed. They didn't feel the pressure of his fingers digging into her back during photo ops, just enough to remind her who she belonged to. 3 months before the trial, on a night soaked in city lights and Scotch fumes, Julian had leaned back in the limousine, swirling his glass as New York blurred past the windows. "You smiled too much at the senator tonight," he said casually. Alicia stared out the window, counting streetlights. He was asking about the charity auction. Julian's eyes didn't leave his drink. "You were flirting." "I wasn't." "You were," he corrected, flat and final. "And you won't do it again." That was life in the penthouse above the clouds. A palace to outsiders, a cage to her. Julian controlled everything. What she wore, where she went, who she spoke to. Her phone synced to his devices. Her credit cards monitored by an assistant whose job seemed less administrative and more surveillance. Even silence had rules. And when Alicia tried to remember who she'd been before Julian, there was nothing to reach for. No parents, no siblings, no childhood home. She'd grown up in the foster system in Ohio, a blur of temporary beds and social workers who never met her eyes. Her file was sealed. Her past a locked room she was told not to open. Julian knew that. He had chosen her because of it. When they met 5 years earlier, he'd been everything she lacked: certainty, stability, power. He'd lifted her out of a cramped Queens apartment and into a world of private jets and galas. She thought she'd been rescued. She hadn't realized she'd been claimed. The first fracture didn't come with a slap. It came with a receipt. A thin strip of paper folded neatly in Julian's jacket pocket. Cartier. Yellow diamonds. She stared at it late one afternoon, her hands shaking, heart sinking with a clarity so sharp it hurt. Her birthday had already passed. She hated yellow diamonds. And the date printed at the top matched a weekend Julian had sworn he'd been in Tokyo. When she confronted him, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply asked. Julian didn't even look up from his tablet. "Don't be tedious, Alicia," he said, scrolling through stock data. "Men like me have needs." Her breath caught. "So, that's it? As long as you play your role," he continued, finally meeting her eyes. "You live better than 99% of the planet. Don't ruin it over jewelry." Then came the smile. Cold, calculating. "And where would you go? You have no money. No friends who aren't on my payroll. No family." He leaned in just enough to ensure she heard the last word. "You're nothing without me." That night something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Alicia waited until his breathing deepened into the arrogant certainty of a man who believed he owned the world. She packed a single duffel bag. No jewelry, no dresses, just her passport, a bundle of cash hidden inside a hollowed-out book, and the only photograph she'd ever had of herself as a child. She slipped out through the service entrance at dawn. She didn't look back. The divorce papers hit Julian's desk 48 hours later. He didn't rage. He didn't throw anything. He made a call. "Marcus," he said calmly when the line connected. She filed. Marcus Sterling didn't lose cases. He destroyed people. "I want her ruined," Julian said. "I want her to leave court knowing she never should have tried." Marcus smiled on the other end of the line. "Then that's exactly what will happen." What Julian didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the judge assigned to his case carried a scar that matched Alicia's, that the woman he was about to face had spent 25 years searching for a child stolen from her, that the courtroom he thought he controlled was about to become a trap, and that the slap heard around the world was not the beginning of his downfall. It was the moment he signed his own sentence. The courtroom smelled like old paper and quiet judgment. Rain streaked down the tall windows in slow, uneven lines, turning the outside world into a blur of gray motion. Inside, everything was sharp. Too sharp. Every sound carried weight: the scrape of a chair, the rustle of a sleeve, the deliberate click of an expensive pen being capped and uncapped again. Julian Thorne sat perfectly still at the plaintiff's table. Stillness was his armor. He had chosen this suit carefully. Navy blue. Conservative cut. No flash, no ego. It was the uniform of a wronged husband, not a tyrant. His hands were folded loosely, relaxed, as if he were attending a board meeting rather than the public dismantling of a marriage. Across the aisle, Alicia sat alone. Her lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, whispered reassurances she barely heard. The words slid off her like rain on glass. Alicia's attention was locked somewhere else, on the space between herself and Julian. 5 feet of polished wood that felt wider than an ocean. She could feel him without looking. That was the worst part. The court reporter adjusted her microphone. The bailiff shifted his weight. Cameras hummed softly in the press section, restrained but hungry. All rise. Judge Margaret Vance entered with measured steps, her expression carved from stone. No softness, no hesitation. If anyone in the room noticed the brief flicker of recognition in her eyes when they passed over Alicia, they didn't dare acknowledge CMP. "Be seated." Her voice was steady, professional, unbreakable. The illusion held. Marcus Sterling stood first. He moved with the confidence of a man who had never walked into a room without owning it. His gray hair was immaculate, his tie perfectly centered, his smile calibrated to suggest concern rather than threat. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "this is a tragic case. Not because of abuse, but because of deception. Julian lowered his head slightly, the picture of restraint. Marcus continued, pacing just enough to command attention. My client opened his life, his fortune, and his name to a woman who carefully curated a persona of vulnerability. Today, we will show that Mrs. Thorne is not a victim, but an opportunist who fled when accountability arrived. Alicia felt it then, that familiar tightening in her chest. This was how it always started, not with shouting, not with fists, with rewriting reality. Marcus turned toward her, eyes kind, voice gentle. Mrs. Thorne, he said, you claim you were trapped, controlled, afraid. He lifted a folder, thick, heavy. Yet in the months before you left, you dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, attended exclusive galas, and spent thousands on personal indulgences. Does that sound like captivity? A murmur rippled through the gallery. Alicia swallowed. It wasn't about where I went, she said softly. It was about permission. Marcus smiled sympathetically. Permission or approval? Julian shifted slightly as if uncomfortable with the implication, just enough for the cameras. Marcus pressed on. Let's talk about control. You claim your finances were restricted, yet you had access to multiple credit cards, correct? Yes, Alicia said. And you used them freely? No. He monitored them. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Monitored or responsibly managed? Alicia's hands clenched in her lap. This was the trap. Every answer had two meanings, and he would choose the one that made her look unstable. Mrs. Thorne, Marcus said, stepping closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. Isn't it true that you have a history of memory gaps? The words hit her like ice water. What? Your childhood, Marcus continued. Large portions missing. Entire years unaccounted for. Would you agree that this could indicate dissociation? Sarah Jenkins shot to her feet. Objection. Medical speculation. Sustained, Judge Vance said immediately, her tone sharp. But the damage was done. Alicia felt the room tilt. Her past, her emptiness, had been weaponized. Marcus nodded apologetically. Of course, Your Honor. I merely seek clarity. He turned back to Alicia. You don't remember your parents. You don't remember how you entered foster care. And yet we're supposed to trust your recollection of events inside a marriage worth billions? Julian exhaled slowly, visibly pained. A perfect performance. Alicia looked at the judge, searching for something, anything. Judge Vance was writing notes, her face unreadable. Alicia felt herself shrinking, just like Julian always said she would. Then Marcus produced the photograph. Grainy, intimate, calculated. A man beside her in a park, too close, too familiar. Who is this? Marcus asked, holding it up for the court. My art professor, Alicia said quickly. I ran into him by chance. By chance, Marcus repeated. Interesting. Because we have testimony suggesting you were planning an escape with him. That's a lie. Is it? Marcus asked softly. Or is this why you left in the middle of the night with cash, documents, and no forwarding address? Alicia's breathing grew shallow. Julian leaned back, watching, enjoying. This wasn't about winning. It was about breaking her publicly. No, she said, her voice trembling. I left because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Marcus asked. Your husband or being exposed? That's enough, Judge Vance said abruptly. Marcus paused. Your Honor? I said enough. Her gaze was fixed not on Marcus but on Alicia's face, on the crescent-shaped scar near her chin, on the way her shoulders curled inward, instinctively bracing for impact that wasn't coming. A memory rose unbidden, a porch swing, a child crying, blood on small fingers. Judge Vance's pen snapped in half. The sound was sharp, final. Mrs. Thorne, Judge Vance said, leaning forward, her voice low but resonant. I have a few questions of my own. The courtroom froze. Judges did not do this. Not like this. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. Alicia looked up, startled. "You testified that you have no family," Judge Vance said. "Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You were a ward of the state?" "Yes." "Where?" "Ohio. St. Jude's Home for Children." Judge Vance's hand tightened on the bench. "And before that?" she asked quietly. "Do you remember anything before that?" Alicia hesitated. "Just fragments. A blue house. Lavender. A song someone used to hum." The judge's breath caught. Her locket felt heavy against her chest. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, relevance—" "Sit down," Judge Vance snapped. Her voice carried something dangerous now. She looked at Alicia with an intensity that made the young woman's throat tighten. "One last question," Judge Vance said. "Do you have a birthmark?" Alicia blinked. "Yes, on my shoulder, like a small leaf." The courtroom seemed to recede. Judge Vance closed her eyes. It was her. God help her, it was her. But the law was merciless. If she spoke now, she would be removed. Julian would walk away. Alicia would be devoured by a system Julian knew how to manipulate better than anyone alive. Judge Vance straightened. The mother vanished. The judge returned. "Proceed," she said coldly, turning to Marcus. "But understand this. Every word you say from this moment forward will be weighed." Marcus nodded, unsettled for the first time. The trial resumed. Witness after witness. Staff statements, financial records, carefully curated lies. Alicia endured it all. Each question peeled her open. Each insinuation dragged her back into nights of whispered threats and locked doors. Her hands shook. Her voice broke. But she stayed. Because leaving was no longer an option. When Sarah Jenkins finally called Julian to the stand, the room shifted again. Power reclaimed its body. Julian swore the oath with a smile. "Mr. Thorne," Sarah began, "did you restrict your wife's access to money?" "I protected her," Julian replied calmly. "She was impulsive." "Is that why she received $50 a week in cash?" Julian's jaw tightened. "She had credit cards." "Which you monitored." "She wasn't well." The words hung in the air. "She fell down the stairs," Julian continued smoothly. "She was clumsy." Judge Vance's eyes locked onto him. "Answer the question," she said. Julian's composure cracked. "She is nothing without me," he snapped suddenly. "I gave her everything." The silence that followed was absolute. Julian stood. That was the moment the room realized something had gone terribly wrong. "I am the victim here," he said, pacing. "She is ungrateful. Weak." Alicia whispered, "I hate you." The words were barely audible, but they detonated anyway. Julian turned and stepped forward. The slap came fast, violent, final. And the courtroom, once a battlefield of words, became a crime scene. The slap echoed long after the sound died. Not in the room, but in the minds of everyone who witnessed it. Alicia staggered back, fingers pressed to her cheek, her breath caught somewhere between a sob and disbelief. For a second, she didn't feel pain, just the certainty that something irreversible had happened, that a line had been crossed in front of the world, and there was no erasing it. Then, the room exploded. Chairs scraped violently. Voices rose in overlapping shouts. The bailiff lunged forward, tackling Julian with practiced force, driving him face first into the defense table. Wood splintered. A camera crashed to the floor. Someone screamed. Julian thrashed like an animal caught in a trap. "Get your hands off me," he roared. "She's my wife. She belongs to me." Those words did something terrible. They didn't just expose him. They unmasked him. Judge Margaret Vance was already on her feet. She had not planned this moment. Not like this, not now. But instinct, raw, ancient, maternal, flooded her veins, drowning out decades of discipline and law. "Enough!" Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Handcuff him. Now!" The bailiff complied instantly. Julian twisted his head toward the bench, fury giving way to disbelief. "You can't do this," he spat. You're overstepping. I'll have your robe for this. Judge Vance descended from the bench. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Judges did not leave the bench, not during active proceedings, not ever. But she walked anyway, straight toward Alicia. She reached out slowly, deliberately, as if approaching a frightened animal. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Her voice broke on the last word. Alicia looked up at her, eyes wide, cheeks burning, tears spilling freely now. I don't know." Judge Vance gently moved Alicia's hand away. Red bloomed beneath her fingers. Something inside the judge shattered. She turned back toward Julian. "I am a federal judge," she said, her voice trembling with restrained fury. "And before that, I am a mother." The room went silent. Marcus Sterling's face drained of color. "Your Honor," he stammered, This is highly irregular." Judge Vance reached into her robe and pulled out the silver locket. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Look," she said softly to Alicia. Inside was a faded photograph of a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket, a tiny hand clutching a woman's finger. Alicia's breath hitched. "I have this picture," she whispered. "I've carried it my whole life." Judge Vance let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "I took it the day you were born." Julian laughed, loud, sharp, desperate. "This is insane. This is a setup." Judge Vance turned on him. "You just struck my daughter." The courtroom erupted. Shouts, cameras firing nonstop, reporters scrambling for the doors. The phrase spread like wildfire. "Judge's daughter, billionaire assault, courtroom meltdown." Marcus Sterling backed away as if the words themselves could infect him. "I demand a mistrial," he shouted. "You're compromised." "You'll get one," Judge Vance replied coldly. "I am recusing myself from the divorce proceedings effective immediately." Julian smiled triumphantly for half a second. Then her next words crushed it. "But the assault I just witnessed," she continued, "is a criminal act committed in open court. Bailiff, place Mr. Thorne under arrest." Julian's smile collapsed. "No," he snarled. "You can't. This is a conspiracy." "Read him his rights," Judge Vance said. The click of the handcuffs was louder than any gavel. As Julian was dragged from the courtroom, he screamed accusations, threats, promises of ruin. None of it mattered anymore. The cameras followed him out. The power had shifted. And the world noticed. Within minutes, the footage went viral. Billionaire CEO assaults wife in court. Federal judge reveals defendant is her long-lost daughter. Julian Thorne arrested on camera. News vans flooded the street. Social media ignited. Julian's stock plummeted before sunset. In a holding cell downtown, Julian Thorne sat alone for the first time in years. No assistants, no lawyers, no glass walls. Just concrete and fluorescent light. His hands shook. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He replayed the moment over and over. The whisper, the slap, the judge standing up. "My daughter." The phrase twisted in his gut. "She was nothing," he muttered. "She was nothing." But the words rang hollow now. For the first time, doubt crept in. Fear followed. By morning, his legal team had fractured. Marcus Sterling was gone, quietly dismissed in the early hours. A new crisis team arrived, faces grim, voices urgent. "This is bad," one of them said. "Not just bad, existential." Julian slammed his fist into the table. "Fix it." "We can't spin assault caught on camera," another replied. "And the judge's recusal doesn't erase the fact that she's her mother." Julian leaned back, suddenly exhausted. Meanwhile, in Washington, Margaret Vance made a choice. She took leave from the bench. Not as a judge, as a mother. She moved Alicia into her townhouse, away from reporters, away from threats. They sat together in silence that first night, unsure how to bridge 25 years of absence. "I should have protected you," Margaret whispered. "You just did," Alicia replied. But Margaret's instincts warred inside her. She wanted to hold her daughter, shield her from the storm. Instead, she opened boxes, financial records, public filings, corporate structures, Strategy over instinct. Julian had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated a mother who knew how to hunt. And as the media devoured his image, Margaret Vance quietly prepared the war that would finish him. Power doesn't vanish when it's exposed. It panics. Julian Thorne learned that in the first 48 hours after his arrest. Phones stopped ringing, not because people were loyal, but because they were afraid. Board members resigned, pending investigation. Banks issued polite, lethal statements about temporary liquidity reviews. His name, once synonymous with dominance, was now radioactive. And somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the outrage and spectacle, something far more dangerous was happening. Margaret Vance was reading. Not headlines, ledgers. She hadn't become one of the most feared jurists in the country by accident. She knew how powerful men hid crimes, not in shadows, but in plain sight. Complexity was the camouflage. Shell companies nested inside charitable trusts, offshore accounts disguised as employee benefit programs, consulting fees that flowed in one direction only. And at the center of it all, Alicia. Margaret froze when she saw it the first time. Julian hadn't just controlled her finances. He had used her name. There were LLCs registered under variations of Alicia's maiden name. Accounts opened with her signature, digitally replicated, tax filings listing her as a silent beneficiary, a legal corpse, a perfect scapegoat. Margaret's hands trembled as she realized the design. If Julian ever fell, the paper trail would point to a traumatized, unstable wife with no family, no history, and no credibility. Alicia wasn't just abused, she was insurance. Margaret closed the file slowly, and something in her hardened. In federal holding, Julian sat across from a public defender he didn't recognize. "That's a mistake," Julian said flatly. "My attorneys are negotiating their own immunity," the defender replied. "You might want to listen." Julian scoffed. "I built empires." "And you built them on fraud," the man said, sliding a document forward. "Wire fraud, tax evasion, identity misuse." Julian skimmed the page, then stopped. Alicia's name, repeated, over and over. His mouth went dry. "That's not..." He swallowed. "That's not how it looks." "That's exactly how it looks," the defender said. "And with your wife now the sympathetic face of the story, prosecutors are eager." Julian leaned back, heart pounding. For the first time he saw it clearly. He hadn't just ruined Alicia's life, he had designed her to fall. "She was supposed to leave quietly," he muttered. "Disappear." "And when the audits came?" the defender asked. Julian said nothing. The room felt smaller. He realized something else then, something worse. Alicia surviving had never been the threat. Alicia being believed was. Margaret Vance didn't announce her next move. She resigned, not quietly. Her statement was brief, surgical, and devastating. "When the law is compromised by proximity to power, justice demands distance. I am stepping down from the bench to ensure the integrity of the proceedings that follow." Within an hour, the Attorney General's office called. By nightfall, a special federal task force was formed. And by morning, Margaret Vance was sworn in as special counsel. The mother had become the prosecutor. Alicia watched the announcement on a muted television. Her reflection stared back from the dark screen between clips, bruised, tired, but upright. She didn't recognize herself anymore. "Do you want this to stop?" Margaret asked gently. "I can shield you. I can keep you out of it." Alicia shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "I've been erased my whole life. I want to exist." Margaret nodded. Then she handed her a folder. Inside were the altered signatures, the forged authorizations, the accounts. "They're going to say you knew," Margaret warned. "They'll try to make you complicit." Alicia took a breath. "Then I'll tell the truth." Her voice didn't shake. For the first time, she wasn't surviving. She was choosing. The indictment dropped on a Tuesday. 17 counts. Julian watched it unfold from a concrete bench, wrists cuffed, suit replaced by orange. The media called it the Thorne collapse. Stocks cratered, properties seized. Allies testified. But what broke him wasn't the prison. It was the hearing. Alicia took the stand, not as a victim, as a witness. She spoke clearly, slowly, without apology. She described the isolation, the monitoring, the contracts she never signed, the nights she was told she was nothing without him. Julian couldn't look at her, because she was no longer small. She was solid. When the prosecutor asked her name, she paused. "Alicia Vance," she said. "Not Thorne. Never again." Julian closed his eyes. The empire he built to protect himself had finally done what empires always do. It collapsed inward and buried him alive. The courtroom was quiet in a way Julian Thorne had never known. Not the controlled silence of boardrooms, not the respectful hush before applause. This was different. This silence did not wait for him. It had already moved on. Julian stood when instructed. His hands were cuffed in front of him now, no illusion of dignity left to preserve. The suit his lawyers once selected with surgical precision hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight, not from hunger, but from the slow erosion of certainty. He no longer knew who he was without control. The judge, new, unconnected, immovable, looked down at him without recognition. That was the final humiliation. Julian Thorne, once a name that bent rooms, was now just a defendant. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "you have been convicted on 14 counts, including wire fraud, identity theft, coercive control, and aggravated assault." Each word landed like a shovel of dirt. Julian's thoughts fractured. This isn't real. This is temporary. Someone will fix this. But no one stood. No allies, no last-minute rescues, no whispered reassurances. His empire had not defended him. It had testified. The judge continued. "You used proximity, power, and psychological dominance to erase another human being for your own protection. The court finds this conduct not only criminal, but predatory." Julian laughed suddenly, a sharp, broken sound. Predatory? He had provided, protected, chosen. His knees buckled. The bailiff steadied him, not gently. "Therefore," the judge concluded, "this court sentences you to 42 years in federal custody." The number echoed. Julian's vision tunneled. 42 years meant forever. The room tilted. He searched instinctively for Alicia. She was there, not looking at him, not triumphant, just present. That hurt more than hatred ever could. As he was led away, Julian finally understood the truth he had avoided his entire life. Power doesn't disappear when you lose it. It turns inward and eats you alive. Outside the courthouse, the world roared. Cameras, shouts, headlines already rewriting history. Billionaire sentenced. Judge turned prosecutor topples tycoon. Daughter's testimony seals conviction. Margaret Vance stood at the steps, composed, unflinching. But when the doors closed behind them, she sagged slightly. "It's over," she said. Alicia shook her head. "No," she replied softly. "It's finished. That's different." They walked away together, not arm in arm, not performing reconciliation for the cameras. Side by side, equal distance. Weeks passed. The media cycle moved on, as it always did. Another scandal. Another villain. But inside a quiet office overlooking the river, Alicia sat alone, reading documents with her own name printed clearly at the top. She had declined settlements, refused hush money, returned properties she didn't want. "What will you do now?" Margaret asked one evening. Alicia considered the question. She had been defined her entire life by absence, first of parents, then of autonomy, then of voice. "I don't want his money," she said finally. "I don't want revenge. I want infrastructure." Margaret smiled faintly. "You sound like a Vance." Alicia didn't smile back. She filed paperwork the next day. A foundation, privately funded, legally armored. Its mission was simple and dangerous. Legal advocacy for victims of coercive control. Not shelters, not slogans, lawyers, accountants, paper trails. The language Julian had weaponized, she would now master. This was her power, Not inherited, not stolen, chosen. Mother and daughter did not become what the world wanted them to be. They did not heal neatly. They did not collapse into each other. They did not pretend 25 lost years could be recovered. They redefined justice instead. Margaret returned to teaching law, quietly, deliberately, training students to recognize power before it corrupted them. Alicia testified before committees, built systems, spoke sparingly. When asked if she forgave Julian Thorne, she answered only once. "Forgiveness implies he still exists in my life," she said. "He doesn't." Victory had a cost. Margaret had lost the bench she loved. Alicia had lost anonymity forever. Their story would always belong partly to the public, but something else had survived: identity, agency, choice. And in a federal prison cell, far from cameras and control, Julian Thorne woke each morning to a truth no wealth could undo. The woman he tried to erase had rewritten the world around him and left him behind.